Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Lookman Issa. Yeah, I'll be making a presentation today on a topic that touches my heart, and it's titled "A Discourse on Carbon Pricing as a Policy Instrument for Climate Change Mitigation in Canada." I'm a PhD candidate at the Chair of Economics here at Brandenburg University of Technology, Cottbus-Senftenberg, Germany. Yeah, with respect to in giving the background to the study, yeah, Justin Trudeau regime, Justin Trudeau administration introduced what we call a Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act in 2018 as a result of as part of Canada's effort to join the global concerted effort in climate change mitigation. As we know, Canada accounts for 1.8% of the global CO2 emissions, and the country is 10th largest emitter of CO2 in the world. So, given this background, the Justin Trudeau administration wants to do more for climate change mitigation. In that regard, it came up with a policy called Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. So, yeah, the policy design under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, we've got the federal benchmark and we've got the federal backstop. The benchmark is a set of criteria in which carbon pricing initiative has to comply with so that it will be accepted by the federal government of Canada. While a federal backstop entails what we call a carbon levy and the output-based pricing system. A carbon levy is what we know as our own carbon tax, and the output-based pricing system works in the form of a cap and trade. Um, uh, while output-based pricing system is for the large emitters, which are the industrial emitters, while the carbon levy is levy on the usage of fossil fuel. This chart shows the state of things in Canada as it stands, and I think with the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act has been enacted, it makes pricing carbon in and around Canada a mandatory. Yeah, in the study, we did an evaluation of the policy instrument, that is the federal carbon pricing policy. Based on the incredible work that was done by Sarah Dobson, Jennifer Winter, and Brendan Broyd, that was published in the School of Public Policy Research paper at the University of Calgary. So we evaluate the federal carbon pricing policy using this set of criteria. We look at the policy coverage. They looked at the policy coverage. They look at the general stringency. They look at cost efficiency, the legal challenges, the fairness, that is the equity, transparency, and a range of other things. So based on the work of Dobson et al. So looking at the policy coverage, we discovered that we've got chunks of unregulated CO2 emissions that are outside the scope of the federal carbon pricing policy. And even going province to province level, you've got at there's a kind of a differentiation across different provinces with respect to the scope of coverage of the carbon pricing initiative. And as you can see here, in Alberta, there is Alberta accounts for the high chunk of unregulated CO2 emissions in the whole of Canada. And that makes it a case that, how will the policy be effective in areas like that? And from the conclusion of the study, we can see a projection which was also done by Sarah Dobson and her colleagues. And in that work, we see the projected potential greenhouse gas emission across sectors in Canada. And looking at, based on this projection, we can see that there is a potential growth or an anticipated potential growth in petroleum sector, which is the energy sector, heavy industry sector, and agriculture. And what the reason for this is there is a poor coverage of carbon price in all these sectors, in these so mentioned sectors. And since there is a poor coverage, This puts question mark on the effectiveness of carbon pricing as a sole policy instrument for climate change mitigation in Canada, because the policy coverage is intrinsically linked to mitigation effectiveness. So if the policy coverage is very poor, then you have lots of emissions that are not being regulated, and as a result, the concerted or the proposed greenhouse gas emissions abatement is will be put to serious question. Thank you.
So we do have Lookman Issa with the Canadian carbon pricing presentation, so we can take a few questions for him now. So go ahead and add more questions if you have them. Welcome, Lookman. Thank you for your presentation. One of the questions we have for you is, how are Canadian carbon pricing policies affected by international greenhouse gas emissions? So for instance, how does US emissions impact policy that might be taking place in Canada?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because with respect to global greenhouse gas emissions, there are global problems. So abatement in one area or one jurisdiction of the world doesn't necessarily translate to global abatement. So there is a need for multilateralism. There is also a need for cooperation. So on one hand, Canada is putting price on carbon emissions. So on the other hand, US doesn't have price on carbon emissions. But I think that's going to be like put pressure on the policymakers in the US to look into proper direction as regards to greenhouse gas emissions abatement.
Great. So I think we may have missed the beginning of your response. Do you mind just summing it up for us again?
Okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. My response to your question goes thus. So I think climate change is a global problem, and a global problem requires a global solution. So an abatement in certain part of the world doesn't necessarily translate to global abatement. So Canada is putting price on carbon emissions, which is a form of abatement policy, greenhouse gas and emissions abatement policy. But it doesn't necessarily solve the whole problem, because an abatement in one jurisdiction doesn't translate to a global abatement. So what I think it is doing in the context of United States is putting the policymakers in the US on a kind of a pressure, so that they can come with a concerted progressive policy with respect to greenhouse gas emissions abatement in the US.
Great. And do you think that there are hurdles to carbon pricing in Canada?
Yeah, with respect to the presentation I gave, there is an hurdle, or there are a set of hurdles that affect the policy. It's a quite good initiative by Justin Trudeau regime, but the problem is carbon pricing. You've got distributional impact, you've got the politics of it, you've got the common perception. So these are a lot of hurdles that need. So with respect to the Canadian carbon pricing, I think there is a great question with respect to permanence, because the political question that is associated with the implementation of the policy has not been fully resolved. There is a kind of ideological battle going on there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lookman, for joining us and for presenting your research today.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you so much, and for the presentation, and also for giving me the platform to share my research. Thanks so much.